In the bustling airport terminal, Ibrahim Traore stood quietly in the first-class line, unnoticed by most. His simple attire, black jeans, a plain shirt and a small bag, seemed out of place amidst the luxurious surroundings. The polished floors gleamed, the rich scent of perfume lingered in the air, and the hum of conversation from the more fashionably dressed passengers added to the atmosphere of wealth and privilege. The first-class lounge was filled with business people and celebrities, each with their eyes glued to their phones or speaking into Bluetooth headsets, while Ibrahim stood apart from them all, quietly observing. He didn't seem like someone who belonged in this space. No flashy clothes, no extravagant accessories, no entourage. Just a man with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the opulence around him. To the casual observer, he was just another anonymous traveler, perhaps an ordinary businessman or a simple tourist. But what no one knew was that the quiet man about to board the plane was one of the most powerful leaders in Africa. Ibrahim Traoré stood with an air of quiet dignity, his eyes calm, taking in the hustle and bustle of the terminal. His presence, though unassuming, seemed to carry an invisible weight, one that went unnoticed by most. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or attract attention. His clothes were simple, yet there was a confidence in the way he stood. No flashy accessories, no designer labels, just a man with inner strength that radiated through his serene demeanor. To anyone who observed, it would be easy to dismiss him as just another regular traveler, but they would be wrong. Meanwhile, Clara, the flight attendant, stood at the gate, scanning the crowd of passengers about to board. As her eyes swept across the first-class line, they paused on Ibrahim. She couldn't help but stare at him, her expression quickly shifting from polite professionalism to something more judgmental. Her eyes scanned his plain clothes, the lack of expensive accessories, and immediately her thoughts turned to judgment. This man doesn't belong here, she thought, eyeing him with a sense of disdain. The first-class cabin was for those who had earned it, she thought, and Ibrahim Traoré didn't look the part. The man standing before her was too ordinary, and certainly not the type to sit in the exclusive seats of first class. Clara gave a slight scoff under her breath, her gaze sharp and condescending as she looked down at him. As the line for first class began to move, Clara took her place at the gate, ready to greet the incoming passengers. She was all smiles and polite gestures, accustomed to the glances of approval from the well-dressed travelers around her. But then, as Ibrahim stepped forward, she paused, narrowing her eyes for a moment. "Excuse me, sir," Clara said, stepping in front of him, her smile faltering for just a moment. "You must be in the wrong line. This is for first-class passengers." Her voice was sweet, but the disdain lingered just under the surface. She looked him up and down, clearly uncomfortable with his plain attire. Ibrahim, unfazed, simply handed her his ticket. "I believe I'm in the right place," he said calmly, his tone polite but firm. He did not flinch under her gaze. He didn't bristle or get defensive. He just exuded quiet confidence as he waited for her to respond. Clara's smile faded completely. She glanced at the ticket, scrutinizing it with growing suspicion. "Well, that's odd," she muttered under her breath, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. She gave him a look, her tone sharpening just a bit, as if her thoughts had solidified. "I'm sorry, sir, but you can't be sitting in first class. Perhaps you made a mistake when booking the flight." Ibrahim looked at her for a brief moment, but said nothing. His eyes were still calm, showing no trace of discomfort or frustration. It was as if the words she spoke didn't touch him at all. Clara continued, now more assertive. "Look, I understand if you don't know the proper procedures, but you're clearly in the wrong spot. Maybe someone made a mistake for you. I'll make sure you get moved." She was speaking now as if it were a favor to him, and her voice had become increasingly patronizing. Ibrahim's response was a simple, gracious smile. "I'm sure you'll do what's necessary, but I'm in the right spot," he said softly. Ibrahim stood still, his expression unchanging, as Clara continued to glare at him, her arms crossed tightly. She half expected a burst of anger, a defensive retort, something, anything that would justify her assumptions about him. But Ibrahim remained a picture of tranquility, standing quietly with his hands at his sides, his eyes calmly meeting hers. The passengers in the first-class line began to notice. A few exchanged glances, curious about the interaction between the flight attendant and the unassuming man. Some whispered, but Ibrahim didn't flinch. His composure in the face of Clara's clear discomfort only seemed to deepen the silence. Between them, Clara's voice grew louder, as if raising her tone would make her accusations more legitimate. "Sir," she insisted, "you really shouldn't be here. I'm trying to help you. You're holding up the line." Ibrahim responded without raising his voice, simply adjusting his small backpack under the seat in front of him, still calm and unruffled. "I'm not holding up the line, and I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he said, his words measured and respectful. Clara, however, was starting to feel unsettled. Her expectations were being shattered. She was used to people reacting to her authority, to being in control of situations like these. But Ibrahim's calmness made her feel like she was losing control, and the power dynamics were beginning to shift. She took a small step closer, trying to assert her position once more. "This is first class," she said, now almost pleading. For him to acknowledge the situation. Some people don't belong here. But Ibrahim did not react with frustration, only offering a quiet smile that seemed to be more knowing than dismissive. The kind of smile that said, "I'm here because I belong here." He didn't argue, didn't try to convince her of his worth. His presence alone spoke volumes. Clara's eyes flickered with a flash of anger, but her frustration was now mixed with confusion. She had expected to unravel him, to push him into a defensive posture, but instead he stood in complete grace. The longer he stood unbothered, the more her authority began to slip from her grasp. And for the first time in a long while, she was left feeling out of control. The tension between Clara and Ibrahim had reached a boiling point. Clara, feeling increasingly humiliated and out of control, took one last shot. She leaned forward, her voice sharp and cutting, as if trying to pierce the calm that Ibrahim had maintained. "You know," she said, her voice low but laced with a hint of mockery, "sometimes people like you get lucky, but not everyone who buys a first-class ticket belongs here." Her words were now more pointed, more personal, as if she were trying to make herself feel superior in a situation she couldn't dominate. "There are places for people like you, but they're not here." Ibrahim didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice or show any signs of discomfort. Instead, he turned his head slowly, looking at Clara with a gentle yet piercing gaze. His eyes were steady, calm but unwavering, and his voice, when it came, was soft yet firm. "I think the value of a place isn't about what you wear or how much you have," he said quietly, his words carrying weight. "It's about how you treat others when you get there." Clara's breath caught in her throat. His words struck deeper than she expected, challenging not just her assumptions about him, but her assumptions about herself. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words failed her. The crowd around them had grown still, and even the flight attendants seemed to be paying closer attention now. The exchange was no longer just between Clara and Ibrahim. It was a lesson for everyone watching. Ibrahim's patience and wisdom had flipped the power dynamic. The room had shifted. Clara, so sure of herself before, now stood in silence, unable to articulate a response. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air, and for the first time Clara could see it. She was the one in the wrong, not Ibrahim. She stood frozen for a moment, her face turning slightly red. She had expected Ibrahim to crumble under her judgments, to apologize or even back down, but instead he had held up a mirror to her own prejudices, and now she couldn't look away from the reflection. As the flight continued, the atmosphere in first class remained strangely tense. Passengers subtly turned their heads toward the interaction between Clara and Ibrahim, whispering among themselves. The air seemed heavier now, as if the previous exchange had left a lasting impression. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her mind still racing from the truth in Ibrahim's words. But there was something else, something she didn't know yet. Just as Clara was about to look away, hoping the attention would shift, the flight attendant approached Ibrahim with a polite smile. She leaned over to him, speaking in a tone that was respectful but still businesslike. "Mr. Traoré," the flight attendant said, catching Clara off guard, "the captain has asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo has been confirmed. He also sends his best regards." The word Traoré seemed to echo through the cabin, carrying a weight of recognition that Clara hadn't expected. She froze for a moment, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. Ibrahim was no ordinary man. He wasn't just a quiet traveler with a humble appearance. He was President Ibrahim Traoré. Clara's heart sank as the shock rippled through her. Her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and humiliation, but it was too late. The man she had disrespected, the one she had judged based on nothing but appearances, was a head of state, a leader of an entire nation. The cabin fell into a subtle silence, and the passengers around Clara exchanged looks. Some nodded knowingly, others exchanged quick glances. Clara's earlier arrogance now felt as empty and foolish as the prejudices she had projected onto Ibrahim. Ibrahim, however, remained as calm and composed as ever, the revelation of his identity barely causing a ripple in his demeanor. He simply gave a slight, polite smile and returned to his seat as if the attention didn't faze him. But for Clara, the weight of the moment was crushing. As the plane began its descent, the once tense atmosphere in first class slowly started to calm. The moment of revelation still hung in the air, and many of the passengers had turned their attention back to their own thoughts. But Clara remained frozen in her seat, her mind racing as the full impact of what had just happened sank in. She glanced over at Ibrahim, still sitting quietly by the window, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside. For a moment, she wondered if he even noticed the ripple he had caused, or perhaps he had always known that such moments would come to pass. Just before the plane touched down, Ibrahim spoke again, his voice calm yet firm, almost as if he had been waiting for this moment to offer his final words. "You see, Clara," he said, his tone gentle but resolute, "true power isn't about the title you hold or the wealth you possess. It's about the respect you give others, regardless of their background or appearance. The way we treat people, the way we show kindness, that's what defines us, not the things we collect or the positions we claim." Clara felt the weight of his words settle deeply within her. For the first time, she understood what had been missing in her own life, the ability to see people for who they truly were, not based on how they appeared or what they could offer. She sat quietly for a moment, lost in her thoughts. The humiliation she had felt when Ibrahim's identity had been revealed was now being replaced by something much more profound: regret and a desire to change. It wasn't just about the lesson she had learned about Ibrahim, it was about the lesson she needed to learn about herself. As the plane touched down and the seatbelt sign turned off, the passengers began to stand and gather their belongings. Clara slowly stood up, her movements slow and uncertain. She glanced over at Ibrahim, but this time there was no trace of judgment in her eyes, only respect. Ibrahim stood too, offering her a polite nod as he gathered his things. "I hope you carry this lesson with you," he said quietly. "It can change not just how you see others, but how you see yourself." Clara nodded in response, her eyes softening with genuine reflection. As Ibrahim walked toward the exit, she stood still for a moment longer, her heart heavy with the weight of the lesson learned.